On a September night in 1969, a gaunt blonde man strode on stage at Toronto's Rock and Roll Revival Festival and asked 20,000 fans to hold up lit matches and lighters. The gesture was to soothe a visibly nervous John Lennon before his first live performance since leaving the Beatles. And it worked. The stadium twinkled with flames as Lennon took the stage. The MC behind this now iconic concert moment was Kim Fowley. It was a quintessential Fowley stunt, outrageous, theatrical and oddly inspiring. But Fowley's story was as dark as it was dazzling. Hailed by some as a rock and roll visionary and self-described necessary evil, he was also reviled for a lifetime of manipulative hustles and scandalous exploits. By the time of his death in 2015, former protégés were coming forward with horrific allegations, and they cast a long shadow over a career that had already pushed every boundary of taste and decency. This is the saga of Kim Fowley, a rock impresario who was by turns brilliant, shameless, exploitative, and revolutionary. Welcome to Rock and Roll Mysteries. Kim Vincent Fowley was born in Los Angeles on July 21st, 1939, into a Hollywood family that was glamorous on the surface and dysfunctional at its core. His father, Douglas Fowley, born Daniel Fowley, was a character actor best known for bit parts in Singin' in the Rain and the TV western Wyatt Earp, and his mother, Shelby Payne, had been a showgirl and starlet, a Goldwyn girl, who once had a walk-on role in a Bogart film. Fowley later sneered that his dad was a B-movie actor and his mom an F- actress. But as a child, he idolized and resented them in equal measure. Their marriage disintegrated when Kim was still in diapers. During World War II, while his father served in the Navy, Kim's mother placed him in a Los Angeles foster home. There, toddler Kim lived in Dickensian squalor, packed in a one-bedroom house with over 24 other kids, all fighting over food and bathwater. It was very Lord of the Flies, Fowley quipped years later. The instability only worsened after the war. Douglas Fowley retrieved 6-year-old Kim from foster care, not out of pure paternal devotion, but, as Kim claimed, to use the boy as a literal partner in crime. Kim alleged that his father brought him along on opium buys to act as a lookout, and even deployed him as bait to charm women in Sunset strip clubs. I'd go up to a girl and say, "Could I talk to you, pretty lady?" Then I'd take off and he'd move right in, Fowley recalled. Once Kim's lanky frame shot up, he would reach 6 feet 5 inches, and a childhood bout of polio left him with a limp. His usefulness in these schemes obviously waned a bit, and the boy was effectively discarded again. By his teens, Kim Fowley had learned to survive by any means necessary, shuttling between the unstable homes of his mother and father, and later a stepfather, songwriter William Frimmel. He developed a hard shell and hustler's instincts. Polio struck Fowley a second time in 1957, and it damaged his nerves and forced him to walk with a cane thereafter. The illness, he said, only steeled his resolve. I was overcompensating as the cripple, a foster home child, an abandoned child. Throw your bricks and your bottles and your bombs at me, and I'm still standing because I've been left for dead since day one, he later declared. Fowley flaunted his physical oddity, the towering height, the cane, the pasty face often painted in garish kabuki makeup, as if it were both armor and theater. Classmates at University High School in West LA, where his peers included Nancy Sinatra and Ryan O'Neal, remember Fowley as that strange kid with a wicked wit. He soon fell in with Hollywood's juvenile delinquent crowd. By his own account, Fowley's late adolescence was a crash course in grift and vice. He claims he burgled homes, sold weapons, wrote other kids' term papers, and even prostituted himself to old desperate women, all before age 20. I had quite an interesting time growing up, he deadpanned of those teen years. Wild as these stories sound, they align with the portrait of a young man utterly unsentimental and unafraid, someone who had seen the worst of life early and decided to make use of it. As one friend put it, When you're 19 and you've already done 13 years of opium runs with Dad and been a seduction advanced man, you know how to talk to people. Fowley's survivalist childhood left him streetwise, cynical, and utterly primed to shake up the music world. In 1959, at age 19, Kim Fowley stormed the music industry with the same audacity that had gotten him through childhood. He hustled his way into odd jobs around Los Angeles, unpaid assistant for legendary DJ Alan Freed, gopher for Doris Day's husband Martin Melcher, intern at local recording studios. He even lived out of a gas station for a spell, just to be near the action on Sunset Boulevard. Before long, Fowley's hustling paid off. A songwriter friend handed him a goofy doo-wop novelty about a comic strip caveman, and Fowley saw his chance. He corralled some musician buddies into an impromptu studio session, paid them $92, and recorded the single Alley Oop. For the artist credit, Fowley and singer Gary S. Paxton called themselves the Hollywood Argylls, after the street where Fowley had been crashing. To everyone's surprise, Alley Oop shot to #1 on the Billboard chart in the summer of 1960. Virtually overnight, Kim Fowley had a bona fide hit under his belt and freedom from his family. I ceased to deal with my parents as soon as I had a #1 record, he later said. I became my own mother and father at an early age. If Alley Oop announced Fowley as a player, his string of follow-up successes in the early 60s proved his uncanny knack for finding trends and whipping up hits from the unlikeliest ingredients. He became a master of the quick buck rock novelty. In 1962, he helped concoct Nut Rocker, a brazen boogie-woogie instrumental based on Tchaikovsky's Nutcracker Suite, performed by a session group called B Bumble and the Stingers. The record was unabashedly silly. Fowley even took a writing credit for the world-famous classical melody. But it was also irresistibly catchy, and it became an international hit, including a #1 in the UK. Around the same time, Fowley came across a bizarre R&B vocal refrain, Papa Mau Mau by the Rivingtons, and somehow sniffed gold in its nonsense lyrics. He helped push Papa Mau Mau into the pop culture zeitgeist, where it spawned countless imitations. The Beach Boys covered it, and the Trashmen later mashed it into their surf rock hit Surfin' Bird. Fowley's eye for talent also paid dividends. In 1963, he produced Popsicles and Icicles, a saccharine sweet tune sung by teenage girl group The Mermaids, and penned by a young songwriter he met while hitchhiking named David Gates, later of the band Bread. That single hit #3 on the US charts in January 1964, just as the Beatles were poised to upend the American music scene. Indeed, the British invasion could have spelled the end for a gimmick-driven hustler like Fowley. Novelty records, quick cash-ins on fleeting fads, those were supposed to be obsolete once the Beatles and the Stones ushered in the era of serious rock. But Kim Fowley proved remarkably adaptable. Far from being washed up by 1964, he found new ways to insinuate himself into the changing scene. He spent time in England as a publicist for PJ Proby, who was himself quite a fascinating figure, who was ludicrously banned nationwide in Britain after ripping his trousers on stage. I'll get into that debacle in another video. He also co-wrote a song for Cat Stevens and worked with an early incarnation of Slade. In 1965, he released a solo single called The Trip, a scuzzy spoken word rant that was not only one of the earliest songs to explicitly reference LSD, but also a parody of the emerging hippie culture. Fowley delivers lines about shattered walls and naked angels with sneering contempt, gleefully satirizing the psychedelic babble of the day. It was proto-punk attitude on wax, a full decade before punk rock existed, and personally, I bloody love it. The original 45 RPM record is one of my most cherished vinyl. But certain others were not so enamored with the new style and attitude. The Village voice critic Robert Christgau was utterly horrified by Fowley's 1968 album Outrageous, which paired fuzzed-out garage rock with Fowley's deranged monologues. But younger listeners were not clutching their pearls about it, and would later recognize it as a cult classic brimming with rather campy, chaotic energy. In Fowley's view, rock was theatre and hustle above all. "Rock and roll is not about beauty, it's about audacity," he declared. He had little patience for the peace and love ethos of the late 60s. He preferred pop culture that was garish, aggressive, even grotesque. What Fowley lacked in musical talent, by all accounts he could barely sing or play, he made up for in his talent spotting and promotional savvy. His understanding of image and outrage made him perfectly suited to the coming glam rock era, and indeed he was an early adopter. By the early 1970s, Fowley could be found expounding on the theatrics of artists like Alice Cooper, on BBC's old grey whistle test, eyeliner smeared and saucy wit fully loaded. But this was nothing new. As soon as a band started bubbling in its cauldron, Fowley would be on the scene like a strange alchemist ready to start sifting out the gold, right from the start of the 60s. The Rolling Stones' first manager, Andrew Loog Oldham, recalled that Fowley was one of the first Americans who smelled something going on in '63 and came to England, calling him a leader of that American brigade and a forever part of American music. In LA, Fowley hung around the nascent folk rock scene. He co-wrote a song, Artificial Energy, for the Byrds, collaborated on recordings with Frank Zappa's Mothers of Invention, and did PR work for the Yardbirds and the Beach Boys. His credits were scattershot, but surprisingly far-reaching. One could find Fowley's name buried in the liner notes of an eclectic array of projects, from producing an early single for the garage psych band The Seeds, to hyping the marvelous and underappreciated hard psych power trio, Blue Cheer, or from recording demo sessions with a young Warren Zevon to securing a UK record deal for the avant rock band Soft Machine. And of course, as you might know, thanks to last week's video, he also produced Gene Vincent's I'm Back and I'm Proud in 1969. As one retrospective noted, Fowley became a virtuoso of the low-rent trash pop aesthetic, an American analogue to Malcolm McLaren, the kind of schemer who might not play an instrument, but could mould the pop zeitgeist with sheer bravado. Not every project was successful though. In fact, most were not. He must have had 20 misses for every hit, if not 30 or 40, observed music manager Cliff Bernstein, who worked with Fowley in the 70s. For example, in 1970, he decided the future of the music industry was in Helsinki, Finland. So he moved there to work with a prog rock band Wigwam, and the resulting production style was, according to Fowley, the primary influence on David Bowie's Hunky Dory. But Fowley's batting average hardly mattered. He lived by the creed of more records, more stunts, more outrageous ideas thrown at the wall to see what might stick. The word no does not exist in my vocabulary, Fowley boasted. It was this relentlessness, this willingness to fail flamboyantly, that kept him in the game long after many early rock hustlers had faded away. He revelled in being an outsider and provocateur. That stance would serve him well as he headed into the mid-1970s, the era where he would make his most infamous mark and court his most infamous controversies. Kim Fowley relished his bad reputation, up to a point. Throughout his career, he cultivated the image of the rock and roll villain. I'm everybody's worst nightmare and somebody's wet dream, he liked to say. I'm a horrible human being with a heart of gold, a bad guy who does nice things. He wore his sleaziness like a badge of honor, convinced that in the anything-goes world of rock, being outrageous was better than being honorable. As Seattle musician Sean Nelson once pointed out, while other predatory men like Bill Cosby hid behind wholesome facades, Fowley, quote, flaunted his lasciviousness. People loved him for being vile. He made the threat of sexual violence a primary component of his persona, and he was richly rewarded for it. Indeed, Fowley's notoriety became part of the lure. The rock press in the 70s and 80s printed his shocking quotes with morbid fascination, and young musicians, especially those desperate for a break, sometimes found his devilish mystique enticing. He was the self-proclaimed Lord of Garbage, reveling in rock's seedy underbelly. In some ways, he could be considered a musical version of John Waters, although Waters was actually very wholesome, underneath the wildly outrageous exterior. If you're interested in Waters, there's a video all about him over on Hollywood Mysteries. I'll stick a link in the description. Unlike Waters, there were genuine victims in Fowley's circus of debauchery. And in time, some would speak out. The most serious allegations against Kim Fowley involved sexual abuse during his Runaways years. The idea to form an all-girl rock group had come to him in the early 1970s. He had already experimented with a few concept groups, such as the Hollywood Stars, who were pitched as a West Coast alternative to the glam New York Dolls. But he didn't find the girls he was looking for until he met Joan Jett, who he was introduced to by Curry Chrome, a lyricist on Fowley's payroll. Jett impressed Fowley by playing along to an album by The Sweep with her ukulele. So, he now had to complete the band by building it around Joan Jett. He met Sandy West in the parking lot of the Rainbow Bar and Grill and got her in on drums. Guitarist Lita Ford was found through a radio ad for the role, and Jackie Fox was spotted by one of his scouts in the parking lot of the Starwood nightclub in West Hollywood. The final piece was Cherie Curry, who Jett and Fowley found at the teen nightclub The Sugar Shack. The band debuted in late 1975, and Fowley knew he was onto something with his precocious young rockers. The debut album was a success in June 1976, but a few months later, Fowley walked out and turned his stake over to Mercury Records. The only problem was that Mercury didn't want the Runaways, so Fowley reconciled with the band and they carried on, touring Japan and releasing 2 more albums. The relationship between the teenage stars and their flamboyant guru producer was evidently tense, but rumours had long swirled that it was not merely tense, but abusive. In interviews over the years, Fowley vehemently denied ever having sexual relations with any members of the Runaways, who were minors when he managed them. Some in the band also insisted nothing of that nature occurred. But there was one former Runaway who had stayed conspicuously silent on the subject, bassist Jackie Fox, born Jackie Fuchs. In 2015, shortly after Fowley died, Jackie finally told her story publicly, and it was harrowing. Jackie said that on New Year's Eve 1975, just a few months after the band's formation, Kim Fowley raped her at a hotel party following a Runaways performance in Orange County. She was 16 years old at the time. According to Fuchs, who spoke in detail to journalist Jason Cherkis, Fowley fed her Quaaludes until she was incapacitated, then assaulted her in a room full of people, including some of her bandmates and road crew. In her account, members Cherie Curry and Joan Jett were present in the room. Fuchs says she drifted in and out of consciousness, but at one point locked eyes with Curry during the assault. Curry, horrified, ran out of the room. Jett's exact whereabouts in the chaos are unclear. None of the teenagers knew how to stop what was happening. It was traumatic for everyone, not just me, Fuchs later said, expressing empathy for her bandmates' paralysis. At the time, Fowley's power over the girls was at its peak, and he effectively silenced the incident through intimidation and shame. In the following days, Fowley reportedly taunted the band about what happened to Jackie, implying she had been a willing participant, all to keep control of the narrative. The band never spoke of it openly again. Fuchs quit the Runaways shortly after, citing other reasons, and the rape remained an unspoken trauma. When Jackie Fuchs's account was published in July 2015, 40 years after the event, many were shocked. Curry and Jett, both of whom had long maintained that nothing inappropriate happened under Fowley's watch, issued statements denying they witnessed any rape. "All I can say is, if I had seen it, I would have smashed him with a chair," Cherie Curry wrote in her defense. Joan Jett said she was not aware of any incident that night. Fuchs responded with understanding, acknowledging that memory and denial are complex. "If they don't remember or remember it differently, that's okay. I hope you never have to walk in their shoes," she wrote. Importantly, Kim Fowley was no longer alive to defend himself. He had died 6 months before these claims became public. But many who knew Fowley believed Fuchs's account. Curry Chrome, a co-founder of the Runaways, said she had no doubt it was true, describing Fowley as having a predatory sexual appetite for teen girls. Other women who encountered Fowley over the years shared stories to various media outlets of being propositioned or mistreated by him as underage fans. The LA Times later reported on a lawsuit by another woman alleging Fowley had sexually assaulted her when she was a young teen songwriter back in the 1970s. It became clear that Fowley's transgressions were not limited to one night with Jackie Fuchs. Rather, they were part of a pattern of abusing power and disregarding consent, the ugliest manifestation of the bad guy persona he had so long embraced. Beyond the sexual abuse allegations, Kim Fowley accrued a long list of lesser controversies. He had a notorious falling out with the Runaways over money and control, and this led to decades of bad blood. Into the 2000s, members like Curry were still battling Fowley in court over unpaid royalties. He was known to stiff collaborators on payments and bulldoze young artists' feelings. In 1978, at age 39, he got married, and even this was controversial. He explained, "I had an ill-fated marriage to an 18-year-old girl when I was 39 years old. I had honeymoon tickets that you buy 6 months early and you get a discount. There was no wife by the time December came around. I went on the honeymoon tickets alone. I had a lovely time, and New Zealand is my favourite country outside America." The marriage had lasted only 68 days, but Fowley wasted no time in New Zealand, and in just 1 week, he recorded a street talk album and discovered the band The Crocodiles. His shock tactics sometimes backfired in public. In 2004, Fowley was invited to perform at London's Dirty Water Club, a garage rock venue. True to form, he spewed such obscene insults at the audience that a woman jumped on stage, grabbed the mic, and shouted for him to just fuck off. Fowley, rather pleased, reportedly grinned. To him, that meant he had done his job. Even in his 70s, the provocateur in him never rested. By the time he reached old age, Fowley had become something of an underground legend, equally revered and loathed. And indeed, some artists continued to seek Fowley out for his oddball magic. In 2014, the indie singer-songwriter Ariel Pink collaborated with the ailing Fowley on songs for the album Pom Pom, essentially giving Fowley one last credit in the current music scene. Fowley also popped up in unusual places, acting as artistic consultant to shock punk Gigi Allen in the late 80s, or trying his hand at producing hair metal bands on the Sunset Strip in the early 80s. He also moved to Australia in search of the new Beatles or ABBA, turning up the Innocents, who became another cult band, but some way off being the new Beatles. These ventures did little to rehabilitate his image, but they reinforced a certain outlaw cachet. Fans of obscure rock and roll history knew Fowley as a Zelig-like figure who somehow kept surfacing in every decade. People either loved him or hated him. There was no in-between. He's charismatic and repulsive, brilliant and demented, a visionary and a scumdog, Evelyn MacDonald wrote. It was as if Kim Fowley had consciously cast himself as a comic book villain of rock and lived the role to its fullest. By the 2000s, age and illness finally began to slow Fowley's frantic pace, but not his penchant for drama. In 2010, just as a new generation was discovering him through a Hollywood biopic about the Runaways, with actor Michael Shannon delivering a memorably unhinged portrayal of Fowley on screen, fate caught up with a real man. That year, at 70, Fowley was diagnosed with bladder cancer. True to form, he took the diagnosis with dark humour, quipping that, after a life spent as a walking rock and roll cliché, he had finally become one in illness as well. In his final years, Fowley's life took some unexpectedly poignant turns. In late 2014, Cherie Curry invited the ailing Fowley to live in her Southern California home so she could help care for him. This astonishing gesture came after years of constant slagging matches in the press and even legal disputes between Curry and Fowley. After everything I went through as a kid with him, I ended up becoming a mum and realised it was difficult for a man in his 30s to deal with 5 teenage girls, Curry reflected, explaining her decision to forgive and assist Fowley in his final chapter. Fowley, genuinely touched, also made amends with guitarist Lita Ford around the same time. Astonishingly, the old manager and his 2 one-time runaway wild children even began collaborating on new music from Curry's living room in 2014. a brief creative reunion nearly 40 years after their band imploded. It seemed an improbable full-circle moment. Kim Fowley, ravaged by cancer, frail and wheelchair-bound, yet once again producing songs with Cherie and Lita, just like it was 1977. Fowley's health, however, continued to deteriorate. On September 24th, 2014, with doctors unsure if he'd survive another month, Kim Fowley married his longtime girlfriend and caretaker, Cara Wright, in a modest hospital ceremony. Wright was a music executive many decades Fowley's junior who had stood by him through treatment. The wedding, moved up from its original Halloween date, was one of Fowley's final wishes, granting him a sliver of personal peace amidst the medical turmoil. A few months later, in mid-January 2015, Kim Fowley died in Los Angeles at age 75. According to those close by, he passed away in a West Hollywood residential care facility in the company of Wright, now his widow, and perhaps in spirit at peace with at least a few of the people who had defined his life. Many tributes recounted his endless list of roles: songwriter, producer, impresario, publisher, manager, promoter, artist, publicist, sex worker, chameleon, creep and cult figure, as one writer put it in all. For all his behind-the-scenes accomplishments, Fowley's most famous creation remains The Runaways, and that is perhaps the trickiest part of his legacy. On one hand, The Runaways story has inspired books, a feature film, and generations of female rockers. Fowley's role in assembling the band and co-writing their signature song, Cherry Bomb, means he will always be footnoted in any history of women in rock. A strange, largely male chapter in that story, but a chapter nonetheless. Some give him credit for having the vision to see that an all-girl rock group could shock the world and open doors. He supported and promoted the Runaways. He didn't want to just fuck teenage girls. He wanted to see them raging on stage, Evelyn McDonnell noted. Indeed, if one sets aside the lurid elements, Fowley did help carve out space in the rock industry for young women to break the rules. On the other hand, the darker side of the Runaways' legacy, the exploitation, the trauma, has now become inseparable from any discussion of the band's importance. The 2010 biopic The Runaways largely glossed over Fowley's more predatory aspects, but subsequent revelations ensure that future retellings will not. Fowley thus stands as a cautionary figure, the Svengali who delivered teenage dreams, but allegedly demanded a terrible price. Perhaps the final word on Kim Fowley belongs to those who knew him best. In the Los Angeles Times, his friend and fellow scenester Rodney Bingenheimer simply said, "Kim Fowley was a piece of work." One thing is certain, the legend of Kim Fowley, outrageous, dangerous, and utterly unique, will not soon be forgotten. Cheers and thanks for tuning into this episode. Quite the madman, old Kim, but what would life be without a bit of character? Anyway, my name's Chester, and this has been Rock and Roll Mysteries. Please do subscribe for more videos. See you next time.